I started with something quite simple, which is that you're presenting at the UKRI's Press Officers Day this week. What were the questions from the room that you weren't expecting?
Do you know what? It's the best question. And hello, everybody. And please feel free to put questions in the chat or ask us later. So, I really like interactive sessions. So it's great to hear from Michael, but also anybody who wants to ask questions. If you've got a burning question, please do ask it because I'm fascinated by, as Michael kind of hinted, the questions that people have because I learn lots from what people are interested in. Um, Actually, I had a lot of repeat questions, I have to say. So I just sort of a very common question about comms being, which we might talk about comms being sidestepped due to people using artificial intelligence and then deciding that actually I'll just let AI do it rather than, have my content processed through a communications function or advisory function. But I think one of
Mhm.
the most interesting was in relation to from a fairly young participant in the day talking about and again, it's not an unsurprising question, but it was one about intergenerational differences in attitudes to artificial intelligence, based on age.
Mhm.
What's interesting is there's a presupposition amongst public relations that there might be quite considerable age differences in attitudes towards artificial intelligence, and I'm really interested in public attitudes towards AI. And there isn't. There was a brilliant study published this week and I would strongly recommend anybody on this call follow these people. It's the King's Institute on AI. So, King's College London, they've got a new AI institute. They had a summit this week and they published a fantastic survey by Omnicom, 5,000 people plus a subset of university students as a proxy for youth. And actually, there's no meaningful, and again, this is the same in the state of the profession studies and lots of other studies. There are no meaningful age differences in relation to attitudes to AI. There's lots of other differences. What was interesting, there was some gender differences there and more positivity amongst younger males as opposed to younger females. So that was interesting. So she prompted a question that I kind of gave an answer to, and I was very confident in my answer. And then later on, somebody published a study that basically meant I could breathe a sigh of relief because it was correct. But the literature is pretty clear on this. There isn't major gender differences in attitudes too, but there are gender differences in adoption actually.
Okay.
Um, Males tend to be overconfident in their, particularly in relation to training needs. I don't need to be trained on this sort of stuff. And females tend to be relative to males, underconfident, etc. So yeah, but there are bigger differences, particularly in public relations. There's big differences between private sector and public sector and not-for-profit organisations. The latter of which are less likely to be trained, less likely to have a team policy, less likely to have an organisational policy, more fearful of AI, and less
Yeah.
confident to improve the quality of their work. And they are a kind of a bit of a poster child for this inverse relationship between familiarity and fear, which has
Mhm.
huge ramifications for everybody on this call because it's public relations' job to help deploy AI responsibly, and we're going to need to help address some of these challenges. That was a lot short question. It was a long answer. Sorry.
No, but it's a really fascinating one. And it actually relates to the next question I was going to ask, which is I'm assuming that people here have at least a passing interest in the effects on AI for PR and comms by attending this call. But you've been working on AI and PR since 2017, before most of the profession was paying attention. So, what were you seeing then that others weren't?
Well, actually, I started in 2015 on a
Oh,
project
sorry.
with NATO. No, it's
Yeah,
okay because it's probably not in the public domain. On a project with
yeah.
NATO, looking at machine learning in social and media monitoring platforms. There was shortcut. There wasn't any or much, and then I started writing about it in 2017, 2018 for the CIPR. I've got a background in ethical philosophy, so I was writing about data ethics actually, and also I
Mhm.
run a research company, so kind of have to know quite a lot, think about data ethics quite a lot. Essentially, what was happening back then was there were survey platforms that I was particularly interested in that were purporting to have some machine learning within that could analyze qualitative data. And
Mhm.
to cut a long story short, it wasn't until the birth of ChatGPT that actually I compared some of these platforms, their capabilities, and we're talking a lot of money for these licenses.
Yes.
I compared their ability to analyze qualitative data. So let's say long form interviews where you're talking to people for about 25 minutes and you've got these huge bits of text of commentary and you're trying to codify that. I used to spend a huge amount of money on codification on coders. They're all still working, but they're doing different things. These people, they're all freelance
Yes.
friends of mine. And ChatGPT could do it better than any of the other platforms. So this is just that leap of in late 2022, September 22 to February 2023. The reason why
Mhm.
we're all talking like this is because that was that step change that then led to the reason why we're all here, because that then led to this proliferation in sophisticated models that could do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. And moving on to the kind of how things develop and it was especially especially your research, and it's found a striking disconnect in terms of in-house teams saying that they've requested AI policies from their agencies, but report agencies reporting very different numbers. So it'd be great to find out a bit more about that and what you actually found.
Yeah, I worry about this a lot. I worry about this in relation to, and then I'll go through the data, but in relation to intellectual property, because artificial intelligence produced content is not afforded any intellectual property rights in this domain or pretty much any others, with some weird exceptions around the world. So, in other words, if your agency is giving you a load of AI generated stuff without sufficient human intervention, it's not worth the paper it's written on in terms of the contract, the intellectual property element of it. They assign you the copyright because there is no copyright because if a machine did it. So I worry about this that people commissioning agencies aren't by as standard asking their agencies for an AI agree, some clarity around whether they've used AI because it's quite fundamental to the commercial agreement. But it goes like this, essentially the majority of there's a big gap in honesty and transparency around artificial intelligence use, both from in-house teams and consultancies. So in-house teams, you're less like you're about 50% now. I know the actual figures, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because it's not been published, the study yet. But let's just say there's around about half of all of us who are commissioning agencies. We're not asking our agencies anything about AI at all. And that's the
Mhm.
same from 2 years ago. So it hasn't improved. And agencies report a sort of similar situation. Around half of them have never been asked by any supplier, are you using AI for this? And so, yeah, it's challenging. And then there are issues in relation to whether we're honest with our stakeholders as well. So there's a Global Alliance study published in 2025, which is again consistent with the rest of the literature, which is that we're not being honest as internal comms teams, in-house comms teams. Sorry, we're not being honest with our stakeholders about AI use either. So it's as private I might say, it's travels all around. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah, it's something I'd seen kind of anecdotally. It'd be great to get your perspective on that. Was it seemed even just in the kind of past year that more or last year when it came to comms work and agencies that there's a worry about clients, people you're working for thinking that you're using AI and that being a negative thing. And this year it feels more like there's more of an expectation from the kind of client, from the kind of boss side. Is that something that you've noticed yourself? And
Yeah,
how far?
well, I mean, I'm really fascinated in the data on this one. So um, there is a growing expectation, and again, the literature is clear about this, is globally. So and it's now defaulting to an expectation that you are using AI, which is really problematic. So one of the reasons why you want to be really forthright about where you're using AI is to demarcate where you're not using it.
Yeah.
Um, and be really clear about that, because let's say you've got a client which values the premium of the human voice, and they've got a sneaking suspicion that every stuff you're doing is AI generated, then it's
Mhm.
devaluing your activity. So real clarity around this. But there's a is imperative, and it's incredibly important. It's important because you want to protect your intellectual property, because you want to claim the human within the activity, and because for ethical transparency reasons as well. This isn't me. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this. I mean, Christopher Penn, great marketing AI and PR AI kind of commentator, wrote a fantastic book called The Woefully Incomplete Book of generative AI back in 2023,
Mhm.
runs Trusted Insights along with his partner, business partner. But he wrote about this 3 years ago. And if you go
Yeah.
onto Chris's newsletter, you could see he says, this is why I declare, when I'm using AI and when I'm not. So AI policies, but there's a really, really important caveat to what I just said, which is we can't just go, this is how we're using AI. It's got to be legitimate in the eyes of the people that we're talking to. Otherwise,
Hmm.
you'll suffer a trust penalty. So there's this University of Arizona, very famous study now, 13 experiments plus a massive literature review, which essentially establishes that if you're using AI in ways in which your stakeholders, like your clients, for instance, or external stakeholders, don't agree with, then you will suffer a trust penalty, including internally as well, the cheat GPT kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we've got to socialize our AI use. It's not sufficient just to go, hey, we're doing this, guys. Which again is a massive opportunity for everybody on this call because it is a public relations exercise.
Hmm. And when it comes to something I'm really interested in is about the potential, and obviously the PR comms marketing professions are all been in a state of flux generally over the past few years, and it seems even more so this year.
Mm.
So what do you think, how much of a concern is it about, particularly when it comes to agencies, that they're losing clients who are bringing AI-driven content in-house? Do you feel that's moving fast?
Yeah,
What, yeah,
yeah, that's a great question. These are great questions. I mean, I've been working with quite a few international agencies on trying to reposition, and think about forward planning. I've been doing that for about 3 or 4 years now, actually. Some agencies were like very straight away. They were like, so particularly heavy media relations agencies, maybe international with a flavor of translation or something like that. Um, there's a brilliant essay called "The Two Clocks Framework" by a lady called Elif Guvencia. So if you just Google "The Two Clocks Framework," you'll find this. It's a brilliant essay, and it's about essentially this question of what happens to the function internally or as an agency. Um, if you are selling outputs, you're in trouble. If you're selling the process of a press release, where if you're selling press release distribution, you're in trouble.
mhm,
If you're selling media relations and you're selling it as media relations, in other words, interpersonal relationships with a journalist through which you're going to get value because they're mediating your message or their outlet is, then it's a very different kettle of fish, and that's something that can be supported but not replaced by artificial intelligence. So I think those agencies that are selling have been selling output-based metrics or output-based, on KPIs related to output as opposed to outcome or impact. I
yeah,
can't sweeten that pill really, Michael. It's not going to look good. Um,
hmm
and yeah, you're right. I mean, I did it 3 years ago, almost to the day. I was standing in a room, and there was a brilliant freelancer there, and she was telling me that she was being commissioned by agencies actually, and agencies again, they're doing this to so it's a food chain thing as well. So agencies are doing this to their freelancers. So she was talking to me about agencies that were hiring her to write tone of voice guidelines
hmm
then using to train AI, and then they were saying to her, "Got no more work for you."
yeah,
So it's going down the food chain. Luckily, with her, I was very pleased to work with her to produce a clause helped by AI actually, which meant that she could take legal action if they did that again. In other words, they couldn't use her content to train AIs, which is good. So it's a double-edged sword.
Well, I think that as you know, that example actually speaks to the. I don't know if there's a dilemma necessarily, but something. The next question I was going to ask, and it is related to that, is around how you put applied AI into best practice, because most of us, I'm sure, majority of us in the core, are using it in some sort of way. And I was wondering what you find, because, like you said, there's good and bad examples of using this. What do you find to be the best in class examples of people using it at the moment as we speak?
I try and avoid sort of talking, telling people what they should use AI for, but it's partly because it's so shaped by the context of a team and the individuals within that team, their predilections as terms of their strengths, the operating context, etc. But best in class for me in terms of approach to adoption. I mean, I've got a framework. I'm not saying it's best in class, but it's useful. It's a strategic framework called the Bridges framework. It's in the book. And um, it's really anybody taking a collective strategic view to adoption rather than the typical approach, which is individual experimentation with individual productivity, sporadic non-team based approaches. So the approaches that work best are those that have some fundamental elements to them, whereby people are saying they're not going, what can we use AI for? They're going, what problems do we have or what
Mhm.
ambitions do we have that AI can help us with? So they're starting from the goal first, what do we want? Where do we want? Where could we get some help from? So they're thinking about their context. And then they're taking this sort of planned strategic approach of collective viewpoints, so making sure that it's a team effort, thinking about uh, a experimentation in a sandboxed environment, so that safe experimentation. So in my model, that's like developing some use cases, but not developing prompt expertise, etc. But you're not using the outcome, you're not using the output, you're just playing because you need to do that, but you're doing it in a safe environment. But also, really thinking through from a team point of view or an agency point of view, where are your pain points? And again, where how might and I've got a framework for thinking this through called the floats framework, which is all about what particular tasks are best suited to AI. So does it free up time? Is it templatable? Is it shared? Is it does it augment? Does AI do some augmentation? So it's basically people taking a planned approach rather than just, hey, let's all muck about and see what happens.
Yes. And it's interesting in terms of what you speak about as well, because the next question I was going to ask about was to do with ethics and trust, and you have the background in that. And we had a question on LinkedIn when I was promoting the event, saying, making the point that the policy gap conversation isn't enough. So, what do you think around the conversation about ethics? Do you think that that's something that the profession is taking seriously enough at the moment?
Um, Yeah, I think it is actually. I think it's we are and that's predominantly from self-interest because we're tasked with maintaining, developing, what the establishing and maintenance of planned and mutual goodwill between an organization. It's public, as defined by, that's the CIPR definition of public relations, for instance. And the clue's in the name. And if we want to keep good relationships with our publics or stakeholders, then we've got to pay regard to their, to maintaining trust with them through to establishing, mutual goodwill requires a dialogue. And a lot of that is, complementary to ethical considerations. And we've also got a wider social duty. So I get a lot of questions from PR practitioners about the energy and environmental impacts of artificial intelligence, for instance. So yeah, I think as a profession we're quite well, not a profession, we're an industry. I wish we were a profession, but or a community. But we're quite alive, I think, to the ethical considerations, independent of whether we deeply care about them or not. I think we are quite good at that. But then again, I'm overexposed to chartered practitioners, members of the CIPR, members of the PRCA, when sadly the vast majority of, or the majority of practitioners within this country are not members of any trade association or not bound by any regulatory oversight and may not
Mm.
even be qualified or accredited. So I'm probably not seeing a full picture.
That's fair enough. I was gonna like ask you more. You talked about some great models and approaches, and there's things such as Bridges model, brief, experiment, adopt. I was wondering how that can work for a comms team that's starting from scratch.
So I think so. The B stands for briefing. It's again Serena Mitchell's chapter in the book, which I think is chapter 10, and Amy Mollett's chapter in the book, which is chapter 11. So Serena talks about in-house adoption, adopting AI within a team. She writes better than I ever would about practical experience because she's done this. She was a really early adopter as a team. She's the head of the PR at the business school at the University of Sussex. She's coming to the event we're doing on the 18th of June. She's speaking. And Amy Mollett is the amazing head of social and digital at Cambridge University. And she
Mhm.
writes about policy adoption. So those two chapters actually, read those. Don't listen to me. Just read those guys because they're better than me about this. But but for Bridges specifically, it's really straightforward. It's uh, B stands for briefing. You've got to have a conversation with leadership and IT. A lot of teams, unfortunately, are you know, using their own money to pay for licenses, or they're doing shadow AI. In other words, you're using models they're not supposed to. This can only take you so far before you get caught, sanctioned. You don't want to be spending your own money. It's problematic. So we've also got to manage upwards. There's a lot of programs where IT is leading on implementation without any influence of public relations. Terrible idea because this is a change program, not an IT program, where leadership is ignorant of artificial intelligence, and that means it's making some quite problematic decisions. So
Yeah.
actually, it's beholden on the comms function to really manage upwards, have a mature conversation about, look, this is what other people are doing. This is the evidence base. This is what we need. This is the tool array we need. Sorry, we can't just use Copilot. It's not going to do everything we need to do. This is the argument for it. Then doing the R stands for research, doing playing around, looking at the models, educating yourself. I is identifying essentially two or three tasks that you within a team that you could collectively use AI on and experimenting on. Not more than that in any given short period, say 2 week period, because if you just throw AI at everything, you won't be able to measure the impact. It'll be too messy. And then, E is experimentation. I've said F is BR, sorry, D is for development, so you're developing your own skills, so prompt skills, it's in parallel. And G stands for guidance, so you've got to have some level of team policy. What I find is quite a lot of organizations are waiting for the perfect organizational policy before they have any team policy. Bad idea. Don't wait for your organization to have some shiny policy, which is just right for about 5 seconds before the technology changes anyway. Have some basic principles of operation within your team. Don't wait for your big org policy because there'll be some considerations that are specific to a comms team. And E is for is for evaluation and measurement. About having it doesn't need to be sophisticated. It's about getting together, discussion after 2 weeks of this program of doing two or three tasks with AI, and then saying, right, what was good about it, what was bad about it, what did we save, what did we lose, what have we lost in terms of cognitive offloading, what skills might we lose over time. Having a good huddle around that. It doesn't need to be a big long conversation or a big form, but you do need to capture, those kind of essentials. And then S stands for supporting the organization. And again, for everybody on this call, this is such an opportunity for you. It's a massive opportunity because AI is a general revolutionary technology that's changing the way that organizations operate, interact, and organize themselves. And that it means it's massively changing relationships and reputations. I've got a library of thousands and thousands of stories about organizations that have been fundamentally changed by AI. And it's our job to help protect reputations and relationships as we go through this quite seismic change, I think.
Yeah, certainly. I'm aware that I've asked probably about 5% of the questions I had ready, and it's all already almost half past
Get now
12, which
we'll continue.
so there's so much to talk about. So I do invite if people want to start asking questions in the chat now, either to everyone or to myself,
No
Ben
bad
personally.
question. There's no bad question, please.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was just about to ask a bit about the book, but actually one thing just around what you said and what I really love about that kind of model is the idea of, because I find it similar to digital in the sense of, particularly thinking 20 years ago, it's easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of things that you can do and the amount of progress and changes. So that sort of very practical choosing one, two things to do personally. And also I love because I was in a session last month, like the idea of just having people in, whether it's a virtual room in person, but being able to talk about what they've been doing and
Yeah,
what they can learn.
that is a really good point, Michael. That's such a good point. And this is because of shadow AI.
Mhm.
Shadow AI is this use of AI that's not necessarily been sanctioned by the organization. About half
Yeah.
of us are using a tool in a way, or a tool that we haven't been, hasn't been approved, essentially, specifically, explicitly approved. And So what happens when I'm training people, like, even with a small team, I'll get them in a room and I'll go, right, amnesty, do you all trust each other? And as long as they trust each other and they've got a leader that's relatively trustworthy, I say, right, amnesty. Now talk about what you've actually been using this for. And there hasn't been a session I've done in the last 3 years where the head of comms or the person leading that team hasn't gone, oh, wow. I did not know you were doing that. I did not know you were doing that. And you get, so some of it's a bit shocking, but a lot of time it's like, wow, we are actually a lot further down the road than we thought we are. Oh my God, that's
Mhm.
brilliant. That's a time saver. I did a team of 40, 10 comms, 10 marketing, 10 customer service, and 10 insights data kind of teams. It was a mixed team about six months ago. And there was one person who was just obviously a super user doing it doing incredible things, and everybody else was just writing down like, "What's he done? Oh, that's amazing!" Because it was the context of
Yeah.
their team. So it was like creating rotors, doing repurposing content, but he was doing all this stuff, and it was relevant to all of them. So they were all like, he was like leading the session. I just stood back and just listened to him.
Well, that speaks. I had a conversation with somebody else this week actually. And that is something that also I remember in terms of having digital champions or champions in certain fields, and the fact that it might not be the person that you expect that is really enthusiastic and using it all the time and has, like you said, tons of thoughts and insights that they can bring to the table.
Yeah, that is a really good point, and actually also a slight warning, it also might not be the person you want it to be. So, this is not related to public relations, but I was doing a presentation to about 25 CEOs of large colleges, further education colleges, a few weeks ago. And one of them said, yeah, the people that were trailblazers in my organization were the people that I didn't want to be the trailblazers because actually I wanted those people to spend more time in the classroom talking to kids. They were people who were they were very technology minded, but actually they were people that he actually wanted to be more interpersonal. And so, we do need to. This is one of the reasons why we need strategic adoption approaches because if we just leave it up to self-selectors, the people selecting themselves might not always be the right people
Yes. Yeah, and I think that speaks
in an
to
organization. Sorry.
yeah, and when it comes to training, then it's also allowing everybody to have a voice in the room and ensuring that nobody feels like they're too silly, they don't know enough to be able to speak up as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the majority of us not being trained on AI,
Hmm.
which and the majority of anybody using AI, this is across different industries. There's a massive training and governance gap, and particularly
Hmm.
again, massive opportunity for PR.
Yeah, like just tangential, but I did see, I can't remember what country it was, but there's a country that's just introduced AI training for everybody in the country.
Mm.
I don't know if it's through Anthropic or something. I could see that being the ability to educate people and provide free training feels very important right now around this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the problems with the British government, I'm afraid. Their training portal for AI was an absolute. It was full of irrelevant. It was very poor quality, very, very poor
yeah,
quality. It seemed to be very rushed. So, but it's an opportunity for other people to deliver training. I gather it's quite variable. Other people report back that they've had AI training, particularly practical AI training, some of which is fantastic and some of which isn't, which is problematic because, once bitten, twice shy. So it might put people off and updating their training. So that's a bit sad, actually.
yeah. I just realized we've got this far and I've still not asked you specifically about the book, which came out earlier this month. So it's yourself and Stephen Waddington who have co-edited AI for Public Relations. So um, I could probably ask you umpteen questions about the process of producing it, but when did you get started in it? How did you find the contributors? Yeah, tell me all about it.
So yeah, so it's here we go. It's a nice lurid cover for everybody, so you can't miss it. That was purposeful. Um, I was everything good in my life happens when I'm walking the dog mostly. Well, not everything, but most things. So about 3 years ago, it would have been about, yeah, nearly 3 years ago. I was walking the dog and I got halfway. Stephen and I were part of a variety of different WhatsApp groups. And for some of them, we felt people interested in artificial intelligence. And for some of them, we felt that there was a we were worried about the tone of discussion in some of them because we felt they were extremely a bit gung ho, a bit gung ho,
Mm.
and and there's a reason for that because there were people, there were really lots of early adopters, and it was, and they're trailblazers. But more generally, we were worried about. We both had discussions for a long time about. We were worried about public relations not having agency in how artificial intelligence affects it. And I'm just a selfish person. I don't want to belong to a club that's rubbish. So I was like, well, what can we do? And essentially, what we wanted to do is bring together as many sort of people interested in this topic at one time to have a discussion. That was the point, to have a discussion about the ramifications of artificial intelligence for uh, public relations. And I said, let's try and get everybody together. And Stephen said, I know what we'll do. We'll write a book. And I'm like, what? That's a stupid idea. And he said, no, 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 honestly, it's a bit like Kevin Costner. He's a bit like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. He's like, if you build it, they'll come. I'm like, okay, okay. So anyway, that's what we did. And we just essentially went out to people we knew, we met, that we knew were experts in particular fields, and are very interested in AI, but also been using it. So Andrew's, did a degree in AI, Andrew Bruce Smith, and he's a technologist in particular and a leading force in that. Richard Bagnall and colleagues at Measurement. And we knew Serena from variety of different things. I'd met Amy speaking 3 years ago on a platform, and I knew that she developed probably the best and earliest public policy on AI that exists in the UK. And Professor Anne Gregory and Dr. And Swati Varami, they were both people who I knew were experts in the social ramifications of artificial intelligence and our societal responsibilities, populations, etc. So we just went out and seems I'm quite well connected, but seems ridiculously well connected as being former president of CIPR and being a respected voice, and he's got a newsletter that's got ridiculous amounts of followers. So
Mm.
yeah, we just went out and found the best people we possibly could for it, and they all said yes. So yeah, that's how we did it.
And from that, because I'm sure we could talk about each contributor in a lot of detail and what they bring to it. Is there anything that you find particularly surprising or challenging or unexpected, and that kind of gave you an added perspective?
Yeah, lots of things. I mean, I've every chapter I sort of quote now in my teaching. There's a bit from every chapter in different sections. I've got modules that I teach, and I lean in heavily to it because it's just really good. There's there's key takeaways at the end of every chapter. So and that's what people are saying that they're really really liking. It's a very practical book. Yeah,
Hmm.
we try to shy away from prognostications about the technology. Um, and make it's not about the technology, it's about the impact of it on human beings, and thinking about how then do you manage a team, how do you get people to adopt AI responsibly, how do you develop a policy that people are not going to reject, how do you think about the broader social problems, how do you manage the risks, what's the implications for the future of the entire industry, what these are the how do you measure this thing, how do you measure our influence and manage it within the machine layer within GEO, et cetera, et cetera. So we had pretty clear questions about what we wanted to answer, and we tried to answer all those things. So hopefully it's timely, but it's not time bound.
Yes. And I think also, I was going to ask a question towards the end around, it's a cheeky question because there's no right answer to it, about if you've been doing and looking at this since 2015, how do you think things would look in 2035? And that feels very impossible at the moment, but certainly, where do you think things will be like in the next 3 to 5 years? And what I know as you said, it's a very nuanced question about individual, but how do you think people can best kind of prepare themselves for what's to come?
Well, it's just slightly different questions there, Michael. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, anybody who answers a question about what's going to happen with any certainty is either overconfident or telling fibs, or both. But and now I'm going to completely be a hypocrite and try that. But I mean, I think there are some trends we're going to see. We're going to see impact on the labour market in our profession and our industry and others. So we will see an impact on early career uh, jobs. We're going to see changes in the shape of teams. We're going to be see an increase in the requirement of our AI skills within job roles, etc. We'll see an increase in, I mean, I think more broadly we'll see a societal bifurcation in relation to attitude towards AI, and we're actually already seeing that. So if you look at the King's thing that I mentioned earlier on, you'll see that there's a big difference between the positivity in relation to jobs impact between employers and people employed. Right, it's pretty different. Like half, we are half as if you're in work, you're about half as positive of the impact of AI on jobs as the person who's employing you. So we're going to
Mhm.
see that we also see some hardening of attitudes against AI in certain quarters, creative quarters, certain regions where, say, data centers that wanted to be placed that people don't want them to be placed, inappropriate placing. So we'll see, I think, this societal split, and that's going to cause lots of issues for us managing the reputation of organizations and teams deploying AI. We definitely see that. I think we'll see a change in the capability framework of public relations pretty quickly, and how that develops. And we've tried to map that out in the book a bit. I think we'll see some major issues in the slightly longer term with model sovereignty and questions over, particularly if there's a continuing degradation of relationships between the US and the UK, of questions over the ethics or otherwise of using certain models. We've seen a shadow of that with the OpenAI's and Anthropic's conversations with the US government about being used for US surveillance and arms. So we'll see a lot of that. And we'll also see a continuing raft of controversies around artificial intelligence use, with some particular sharp points around AI generate deepfakes. And for us as a community, that's one absolute core thing that we need to be skilled at, which is defending our organizations against misinformation, disinformation that's made ultimately much more convenient by artificial intelligence.
Of course, yes. I think we do have space for one or two quick questions from the audience if anybody does have any burning questions before the end of the session.
Yes.
I'm going to ask one more question as well right now, and it's another kind of poser. But if someone watching the session does one thing differently as a result of the conversation that we've had, what would you want it to be?
I think it would be something pretty basic, like, if you haven't been trained on something like prompt development, do reach out and try and get that, because even something as small as that, so that learning how to effectively instruct a large language model like ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, Gemini, etc. There's a sort of idea that that's going to become redundant with the ongoing growth in agentic AI, but actually understanding how to instruct an AI, whether it's a large language model, a standard model, or an agentic model, and explain your workflow, explain what you want, is a really precious skill, and it will continue to be a precious skill. So
Mhm.
learning how to do that is the singular most impactful thing for an individual, I think, you can do for yourself.
Yeah. And then I slightly quit there because I do have one final question, which is, and it's just, I think given what you're doing, your experience, I'd be remiss not to ask, what are the mechanisms you use for keeping up to date with what's going on? And because I find myself, I'm subscribed to umpteen emails, I'm looking at LinkedIn. Sometimes I feel like there's too much information, but I wondered what for you is kind of key things that you pay attention to and helps keep you on track.
I spend half a day a week reading articles about artificial intelligence. So I'm pretty old school. I've got a Google alert on artificial intelligence, and every week I go through every single story that's published, and I class and the ones that that look relevant to what I'm interested in. So I don't read stories about Nvidia stocks, but pretty much everything else, I'm going there and reading it. And then I classify them in a library, in a kind of AI supported library called Raindrop.io, which is brilliant, by the way. Anybody who wants to run a links library. So yeah, pretty old school. Because why? Because I've got to go on things like this and explain it to stuff. And if I don't read it myself, then I'm not going to be very good at that. So I don't use any apart from I don't think I use any machine learning in that actually because otherwise I don't learn anything myself.
No, I really like that answer because I think we were chatting just before the start of the session around I was moaning about MailChimp and spending too many hours this morning trying to get it working. And I love the fact that in some ways things are fundamentally changing, but there's still Google Alerts and MailChimp and things that have been around for years and decades that people are finding sometimes slightly frustrating, but often of use for what we're doing. So yeah, I just like to thank you again, Ben, for your time. I absolutely loved the conversation.
Thank you.
Um, so appreciate it. Said the book AR for Public Relations is available on all good bookstores and of course online.